Hey folks, welcome back. My name is Cyrus Davis, and I have another post rotation deck profile for you today, this time on everyone's least favorite top tier post rotation archetype, attacking Walls. So, Walls has been a deck that has been around for a while, really since my testing group played it to Baltimore Regionals and made top 8 with it. But it changed a lot now, and now it is finally actually a top tier respected archetype going into the post rotation metagame, because decks have lost a lot of their potential techs that can answer Walls easily. This new iteration of Walls is honestly really cool, and I think that it offers a lot more complexity than previous iterations of the Walls deck. I think that the addition of things like Munkidori have really made the deck a lot more flexible, and honestly I'm excited to show you it and play it a little bit post rotation. So let's get right into it. So first, the Pokemon, starting with that 3/3 Milotic. This is our wall for primarily the Dragon Ball matchup. Also really good against Charizard. Ceruledge is a deck that I don't think is going to be popular anymore, but of course good against that as well. Can have some value against other Terra decks like Terrabox, but is not a primary wall in those matchups. We really are only setting it up in those matchups if we can't set up our better wall for those matchups. But Milotic, just playing the 3/3 line, very important for consistently beating Dragapult and Charizard. I think that 2 is definitely enough for Dragapult. 3 you really need for Charizard. You also really want 2 in every matchup, so you can't really afford to play 2 and then prize 1. So the 3 just to make sure that we're always able to set up our double Milotic when we need to. Next we have 2 of the Cornerstone Mask Ogerpon EX. So this is great against... does have some value against Charizard, not as much now because they're all playing Terapagos EX, so they can one-shot it. Mostly for Goldengo and for Alligator. Both of those decks have a very tough time dealing with Cornerstone, do not have great options for knocking Pokemon with abilities, or attacking with Pokemon that don't have abilities. I think that Goldengo will probably be most commonly played with Dragapult, which means they will have, as I'm playing the Dragapult Goldengo build, that is a pretty bad matchup for us. They have the Dragapult as an answer to Cornerstone, and then Goldengo as an answer to everything else. But if they're playing regular Goldengo with just the Dunsparce engine, they can attack with the Dunsparce EX at some point into Cornerstone, but they're not going to outpace our double Cornerstone plus Munkidoris. Next we have our next wall, the 3/2 Farigiraf line, and this is our, honestly, strongest wall. We only play 2 because, although it can be nice to set up 2 in a lot of matchups, we really only need 1 in most of the matchups that Farigiraf is good into, unlike Milotic, which a lot of time I think that you need 2. Farigiraf you can get by with 1. It's a stronger lock in the matchups where it's good, honestly. So we're just playing the 2 copies. We can afford to prize 1. But this is going to be our wall into things like Raging Bolt, Terrabox, really any deck that centers around basic Pokemon. Dirty Beam is also just all of these attacks are good. Demolish, being able to get through stuff is a nice bonus effect to it. Hypno Splash, putting the opponent to sleep, is very synergistic with just a wall strategy and just sort of slowing your opponent down and making them try to brute force their way through you if they're asleep. That adds a lot more difficulty to them. And then Farigiraf's Dirty Beam, doing 30 damage to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon, especially in combination with our Munkidori damage, allows us to take our prize cards a lot quicker, which means even if our opponent does have some answers to the Farigiraf, we can a lot of time just take our 6 prize cards before they can anyways, thanks to that extra damage on the bench and our Munkidoris. Speaking of the Munkidoris, we round out our Pokemon line with those 2 copies of Munkidori. I'd almost want 3, honestly, if I could fit 1, but the deck list is definitely a little bit tight. Adrena Brain just keeps your Pokemon healthy, providing extra damage to set up for Dirty Beam knockouts, or even Bench Snipe knockouts on Hoots in combination with the 30 damage to the bench. I think that usually you set up 1 or 2 Farigiraf, and then your opponent, even if they knock both of those out, they'd bench you out to win the game, but they still have a couple of prize cards left. So usually it's not a big deal to bench a couple of Munkidori. They can chase those down for some extra prize cards, but it's not really going to help them actually win the game. They still have to deal with your Farigirafs or your Milotics or your Cornerstone, whichever it may be. So just making all of your walls have that additional longevity by being able to heal them up with Munkidori, and as well as if your opponent does have some answers to you, being able to win the game faster by putting more damage on to your opponent's board. Mind Bend can also be a pretty decent attack if you are phasing down something that can answer your attacker. So if you're playing against something like, let's say, Terrabox with a 1 of Cornerstone, and their Cornerstone is just hitting through everything, you don't have the energy on anything to actually deal with it, going for like a Mind Bend on the Cornerstone to confuse them can slow them down a lot and sort of alleviate some of that pressure. So it's just a decent option in a pinch, really. Next we have our supporters. So we're playing the max 4 copies of Crispin. We play 4 different types of energy, and we need to make sure we find the right ones at the right times. We also don't have double turbo energy anymore, so getting extra energy into play is very important for actually getting attacking quickly, and of course very important for getting the dark energies on our Munkidoris when we need to attach to other things to attack, and just search out our dark energy in general. So Crispin, just incredibly powerful supporter in this deck. I would never play less than 4, honestly, in this build of the deck at least. I think you really need that way to search out your different energies as well as get those extra energy onto the board. We're playing 4 copies of Arven. We just always want to see Arven early game. We need to make sure that this is the most consistent way to get our walls out, getting like Buddy-Buddy Poffin and Evo TM, or getting our Turbo Energize to get our energy into play, or our Rigid Band to bulk up our Farigiraf or our Milotic. Arven just very, very important for our setup, and of course does have some more longevity in the mid to late game, just being able to like grab Pokégears for next turn, or find the Poké Vital at exactly the right time, because that is going to be using the Poké Vital to heal 150 on exactly the right turn. It's going to be pretty important, so that is where Arven comes in handy the most in the mid to late game. We're playing 3 copies of Bots Zorders. I know that some lists are playing 2. I honestly would like to even play 4 if I had the room. But I think that, especially when your opponent has some answers, like maybe like a 1 of Cornerstone and Terrabox, for example, having the heavy boss count just to make sure that you can chase down some of their answers, maybe some of their Hoots, or just sort of take your 6 prize cards faster than they can when you're both just sort of taking 2 shots back and forth. That's a big thing with like a lot of the answers to this deck, is that a lot of them are still like 2-shotting, maybe even 3-shotting your walls. So it's like, even though they have a way to hit through you, they're only at best like trading with you evenly on attacks. So having these copies of Bots Zorders just allows you to make sure that you're able to outpace them and take your 6 prize cards before they can, when your opponent has some answers to trade with you. 3 copies of Professor's Research, just the best draw card. We have a lot of cards that are dead in a lot of matchups, like Milotic and any Farigiraf heavy matchups is usually dead, and vice versa, or Cornerstone's usually dead. And we just sort of want to burn through our deck and, find our bosses, find more energy, get our Munkidori set up. We don't want to really like dilly-dally and just like draw a few cards in the mid-game. We want to make sure that we're just like completely refreshing, dumping all of our useless cards, and digging as deep as we can into cards like Boss to seal up our games. We're playing 2 copies of Iono just for some extra early game draw, and then to have disruption options in the mid to late game. In any close game, having that like 1 turn of disruption is going to be pretty important. And of course, we don't have any way to search out the Iono. We can try to hit it off Pokégear, but having only 1 copy would make it very difficult to ever use it at the time that you need it. So we're playing 2 just to less so because we ever want to use 2, more so just because we want to make sure that we have decent access to Iono over the course of the game when we do want it. A lot of time you're fine with your opponent having like a decently sized hand, but you don't want your opponent you don't want to play no Iono and then your opponent just builds up like a 17 card hand, and by the end of the game just has whatever option they want at any time. You want to have at least 1 Iono to disrupt your opponent's hand over the course of the game, just to make sure that they don't reach an end game where it's really easy for them to find everything. Next, our item cards. We have 3 copies of Nest Ball. Because we have so many different walls that we want to set up, it's kind of hard to fit in the maximum consistency copies of our Pokemon search. But Nest Ball is of course the best card for searching out a lot of our walls. We can Buddy-Buddy Poffin for Feebas, of course, but Nest Balls are going to be our only way to grab those Girafarigs, the Munkidoris, and the Cornerstone. So playing the 3 copies, a 4th would be nice, but again, the space is just really tight in this list, and 3 is usually going to do the trick with those 4 copies of Arven. So then we have 2 copies of Ultra Ball. just more ways to search for out Pokemon turn 1 mostly, but we also, even though we're Evo TMing for our Milotic and Farigiraf most of the time, that's not going to be every game. There's so many games where we like open the Girafarig and we just want to Ultra Ball into the Farigiraf turn 2 before it gets knocked out. So having a couple of copies of Ultra Ball to search off of Arven is very important, just to make sure that we get all of our walls out in a timely fashion. 2 copies of Pokégear, another card that we'd really just like to play as many as we can of, but 2 is pretty much as many as we can fit. We play pretty thick counts of most of our supporter cards, so typically it won't be too difficult to find them. I'd rather play thicker counts of our supporters than play more Pokégears, to be honest, because Pokégear can always miss or just not find the right one at the right times. And really, just having any supporter is always going to be better than, like, missing a Pokégear, right? So, just playing a couple copies to make sure that, you know, we can only play so many Crispin, we can only play so many Arven, and these are basically just acts as extra outs to those cards in the early game, and then, you know, extra boss and Iono outs in the mid to late game. Next, we have a one of Super Rod. We have not a ton of need for recovery, but we do want to get back some of our walls sometimes, especially if we prize like a Milotic or a Farigiraf, or we want to like Super Rod back in Munkidori and Dark Energy. Usually when we want to shuffle back in one thing, we want to shuffle back in multiple. We also play the 4 Crispin, right? So there's a lot of synergy with just shuffling energy back in and then Crispining them out. But there's also a lot of synergy with Super Rod and Evo TM if we want to like Super Rod, a Milotic back in, and then Evo TM it to evolve against Feebas. It's a lot easier to do that. Like, Night Stretchers is not as synergistic with the way the deck works at all, to be honest. 1 copy of Earthen Vessel we do want to have, although we usually just search for most of our energy off of Crispin's and Turbo Energize, having 1 Earthen Vessel as a Arven searchable way to find energy, still very, very important, especially for getting the turn 1 Evo TM or the turn 1 Turbo Energize play off. We are playing 1 copy of Buddy-Buddy Poffin, and this is mostly just so that we can, in the matches where we want to use Milotic, obviously Feebas is very, very frail. We want to evolve it as quickly as possible, and we pretty much always want to Evo TM it. So we want to be able to go Arven for Buddy-Buddy Poffin Evo TM and just immediately get our 2 Milotics out. We don't want to have to like slow set up multiple Milotics over the course of the game. Farigiraf, you can afford to do that a little bit more with, but Milotic, because of the 30 HP on Feebas, you really need to just turn 1 Buddy-Buddy Poffin, Evo to double Milotic, and call it a day. We're playing a single copy of Counter Catcher rather than playing like another copy of Boss. Usually, in closer matchups, you will usually start the early game, or you'll go enter the mid game behind. So this is just basically going to be an Arven searchable Gust at some point in those games to allow you to alleviate some pressure. And any close matchup, Counter Catcher is just going to be a card that is going to make that a lot more winnable for you, especially giving you the option to with if your like Farigiraf gets hit, does 160, right? So you can like double Munkidori off of Farigiraf onto Pheasantipity, Counter Catcher the Pheasantipity, and then Iono your opponent to a low hand size. Obviously, that's not an option if you're using a supporter based Gust. So the Counter Catcher does open that line up to you as well. And then because we don't have like onboard draw or anything like that, right? Like there's just gonna be so many situations where we need a Gust for game. We get like Iono'd and we find an Arven, but we don't find a boss. So having that Arven searchable Gust is just gonna be very, very important when we don't have a lot of other ways to draw cards. And then lastly, we have the Poké Vital A. I like Scoop Up Cyclone as a card in these decks too, but it does not really work post-rotation because we're so reliant on these evolution Pokemon as our walls. Scoop Up Cyclone is just not very synergistic with the Evos. Also, it works a lot better with Rigid Band than something like Hero's Cape. Hero's Cape was something I wanted to play originally. Because if you are playing something like Penny, then you can like Hero's Cape a Cornerstone and then Penny it back up. But without something like Penny to reuse the Hero's Cape or move it to something else, the 150 damage heal from Poké Vital A is pretty much just always going to be better. And allows you to combo with Rigid Band, whereas you cannot do that with Hero's Cape either, right? You can Rigid Band a Pokemon and then Poké Vital the same Pokemon. So Poké Vital just basically completely heal off an attack. It allows you to... this is like going to be very key to ever beating like Cornerstone techs and stuff like that, or you know keeping one Farigiraf alive for a long time when your opponent has like a bunch of ways to do a little bit of damage to it but not quite knock it out. So Munkidoris and Poké Vital are just going to be add up to a lot of healing. That way you can just take your 6 prize cards before your opponent finds enough attacks to actually deal with your Farigiraf. Stadiums, Tools, and Energy. We are playing 1 copy of Artazon, just to have another way to search out our base Pokemon early on, as well as have a Stadium bump. And then we're playing 1 copy of Town Store. We play, 4 tools that we're all pretty reliant on. We like all of our tools. So just having this one more way to search for the right tool early game, or mid game, even finding like the Rigid Band, as well as having a Stadium bump. Honestly, a lot of decks aren't able to benefit as much from Town Store. There's still like a lot of tools floating around, but I think like without Forest Seal Stone, stuff like that, Town Store definitely doesn't have as much value for your opponents right now, in my opinion. Decks like Terra Box don't even really play tools, so I mean, just Noctowl engine decks in general tend to not play a lot of tools. So Town Store is a pretty good Stadium bump in the current format. And then for tools, we have the True Technical Machine Evolution. We can't afford to prize this. We are pretty much trying to Evo TM into our Milotics or Farigirafs in every single game that we want to set either of those up. So Technical Machine Evolution is very, very essential to your strategy, especially with Milotic. Like I was saying earlier, the Feebasses are just so fragile. You have to be Evo TMing into them. You can't afford to just like leave them there to get picked off before they can evolve. Then we are playing one of Technical Machine Turbo Energize. You'll use, honestly, I kind of want to play 2 of these. You do use it most games at some point just to get some energy down early on and set up more attackers. But it's definitely not essential, especially with the 4 copies of Crispin. You have a lot of other ways to accelerate energy to the board. Turbo Energize just lets you be a little bit faster. And of course, in games where you're using Technical Machine Evolution, the Turbo Energize loses a little bit more value too, because by the time that you can actually use by the time your Pokemon are evolved with TM Evo, now you can just start using your Crispins, and you should have a decent amount of energy on the board to set up your attackers. But the Energize is still very nice. It also is really nice for just like setting up your Munkidoris, just like going ahead and Turbo Energizing a Dark onto both of them. So that is also just a very nice use for the card. I do this is like the second Turbo Energize is honestly one of the cards that I want the most in the list, because it does feel like I want to use it most games, but you can't afford to prize it and still get by. It's not like you have to use it every single game. Then we're playing a single copy of Rigid Band. I think, to me, Rigid Band's sort of a no-brainer in this deck. Your opponent just doesn't have any way to remove it, and your opponent's typically trying to deal with your Milotic and Farigiraf in, pretty sad ways with, like, Fan Rotom or Dracloak attacks. So just reducing those damage just from like 70 to 40, and then being able to just get like all the damage off with Genebrain just like completely shuts out a lot of your opponent's options. I think Rigid Band is huge for games where you draw pretty poorly. This deck doesn't have the most draw power. It can feel clunky at a lot of times because you don't have that built-in draw power, and you're sort of relying on, okay, well, like I can draw kind of bad, but it doesn't matter because my opponent doesn't have good answers to deal with my walls anyways. And sometimes if you draw really bad, then even if you get your walls out, if you're not attacking, they can just like keep swinging at you, something like a Fan Rotom, right? So having that one-of copy of Rigid Band just sort of protects you from losing the decks that you otherwise shouldn't, in just being able to reduce their already little amount of damage they can do down to even lower, and usually enough for you to just be able to kill off the Munkidoris. The energy count is 3 Psychic, 3 Water, 3 Dark, and 2 Fighting. Cornerstone is definitely our least valuable attacker, so that's why we're only playing the 2 of them. We also are really never setting up more than 2 Cornerstone. We still have the Super Rod if we do need to get the Fighting Energy back. Whereas like we want to set up 2 Munkidori in a lot of games, so we don't want to prize one or have to discard one. We also end up using random energies to power up our attackers as well, right? Because we're like Crispining, our Milotic needs water and our Farigiraf needs a Psychic, but the other energies that go on it can be whatever, and we're sort of Crispining them into play, right? So sometimes we might have to Crispin a Dark Energy onto something and then still want to have more Dark Energies to set up our Munkidoris. So when we're trying to use like 2 Farigiraf in a game when we want to use Farigiraf, 2 Milotic in game when we want to use Milotic, 2 Munkidori in a game when we want to use Munkidori, it's just important to have 3 copies of each of those in case we prize one. And of course, for maximizing the amount that you can use Crispin in general, it does just make sense to have a pretty even spread of all of your energy. Now, we can move on to the matchups. So our favorable matchups, we have Raging Bolt. This matchup section for this deck is going to be relatively simple. I mean, Raging Bolt does not have you know, typically does not play an answer to Farigiraf EX. Farigiraf EX plus Poké Vital plus the Munkidoris is just going to be able to sweep them. They really don't have a lot of good techs they can even play. If they do choose to tech for you with like, they can play like Cornerstone, but they can't set it up as easily as something like Terrabox can. They can play, there's like a Great Tusky X they can play, but really all of the techs that they can play are terrible against everything else, and a lot of time, for a lot of these matchups, I'm just going to assume that they aren't playing like the wacky tech to beat walls, because they really shouldn't be. Most lists I've been seeing have not actually been respecting walls. If you want to beat walls, just to get this out of the way right away, the answer is not to play Raging Bolt and then like try to fit in like 3 cards to beat walls. The answer is just to play a different deck that beats walls. Or if you don't think it's that important to beat walls and you really want to play Raging Bolt, just play Raging Bolt and take the loss to walls. That is typically going to be the answer, and that's sort of the way I'm going to be approaching a lot of this matchup table. Is like Raging Bolt players, if they're playing Raging Bolt, they should really not, it's not optimal for them to be respecting walls, and they are not going to have consistent answers for a draft. They're going to be attacking you with Rotoms, you're going to be pushing that damage back onto them with Adrenabrains, and you should have a pretty easy time. Dragon Bolt, Dusknoir, same deal. You just set up 3 Milotics, and they can really never deal with 3 Milotic. Even 2 Milotic, and like a Munkidori is not something they can deal with. So, yeah, another very, very easy matchup to set up your Milotics, and you'll be good. And Zoroark, very, very ability reliant. All of their attackers, except for Darmanitan, have abilities, and they can only set up Darmanitan with reversal energy, so they can't attack with it forever. Cornerstone is going to be like able to pretty easily, the double Cornerstone should just wall out and Zoroark pretty consistently. I haven't yet to see lists with many attackers that can do anything to a Cornerstone. So, I mean, these End Zoroark lists are obviously still pretty all over the place. You know, it's hard to predict exactly what people are going to be playing in it, but I don't think that there are a lot of great answers to Cornerstone that they could be playing. Charizard EX, another favorable matchup. This one's closer to the Dragon Bolt Dusknoir matchup because they do have like Briar, Dusknoir, Iono, and the Briar honestly can be a decent factor. They can, and you really have to go for the Milotic setup, but then they can still attack the Milotic with Pidgeot, which gives them another little option that Dragon Bolt Dusknoir doesn't really have. Now, they still should not be able to get through 3 Milotics ever, and 2 should still usually be enough for them, but they just have a little bit more options than Dragon Bolt does, so I figured that was worth mentioning. Then we have Feraligatr. Now, this deck is another deck that just gets walled out by Cornerstone. They don't really play answers to it. You know, the Munkidori can't hit it, the Feraligatr can't hit it. They can hit you with like the regular Croconaws or Totodiles for a little bit of damage, but that's not really going to do much. And even if they play the Milotic still can't hit into a Cornerstone. So they're really relying on just like Torrential Heart plus Munkidori combo to do enough damage to knock out your Cornerstones, and obviously that's not going to be a very effective strategy for them, especially when you have your own Munkidoris that you can set up. Even matchups, we have Terrabox. So, Terrabox, I'm calling even because most lists are playing the Cornerstone right now. So, this is the one exception where, like, they can pretty easily fit in the Cornerstone. I don't think it's worth it. I think that you do still have a slight edge. It's not enough to consistently beat walls, but most lists are fitting in that one of Cornerstone, one of Fighting Energy, which allows them to have an attacker that can get through all of your walls. Your goal is basically none of your only attacker that can hit through their Cornerstone is your own Cornerstone, right? And if you bench a Cornerstone against Terrabox, they're just going to knock it out really, really easily with like Terrapagos. So you do want to have go for the Farigiraf here, and then ideally you take a few prize cards early on before they get the Cornerstone set up, and then you can sort of boss around for your last few prize cards, or use Munkidori damage and the bench snipe damage from the Farigiraf to clean up some prize cards here and there. You know, of course, you can use Counter Catcher for Gust as well. The more Gust you have, the easier this matchup is, because they're just trying to wall you out with Cornerstone for as long as possible. But Adrenabrains and Poké Vital mean the Cornerstone is going to take a while to actually knock out your Farigiraf, and if you're in a pinch, you can just like late game Iono them to a low hand size after like dealing with their last Hoot, and then start setting up a Cornerstone to deal with their Cornerstone. It's not ideal, but you are always going to have answers to their Cornerstone. And of course, if they don't play the Cornerstone, then you should just completely wipe them out with Farigiraf, which is why I'm still considering this like a pretty close matchup, but it's not something that I'd be worried about hitting at all as well. Next, then we have Archaludon EX. So this is another matchup where typically they don't really have good Cornerstone answers, but they are all trying to fit some sort of Cornerstone answers in, right? So if you play against a list where it's just a pure Archaludon deck, maybe Archaludon to Dunsparce, I think is becoming. I know a few people have posted videos on that now, and that seems to be where people are going with it, because you got like the Dunsparce EX, which can hit through Cornerstone, but the Dunsparce EX is not going to be enough to hit through Cornerstone anyways. I think that matchup is very favorable for you. The Cornerstone should be able to just wall them out, especially with the Munkidoris. However, if they play a list with like Scissor EX can pretty easily clear through all of your walls, so that is going to be very problematic. That's like basically... That's just always going to be a losing matchup. So I'd say that most games, depending on your opponent's list, are going to either be very much in your favor or very much unfavorable for you. So I'm putting it in even just because the list for Archaludon and the variants are sort of all over the place. They can it'll be probably a few events before they actually settle on like one attacker as like the main side attacker for Archaludon, or at least the most popular. Then we have our unfavorable matchups. Most of these are just because they have answers to all of our walls. So we start with Goldengo. Now, if this is regular Goldengo or Goldengo with the Dunsparce, great matchup. Cornerstone should be able to carry. Of course, they have the Dunsparce EX to hit through Cornerstone, but it's not going to be enough to deal with Cornerstone plus Munkidori plus Poké Vital. However, I'm considering the most popular Goldengo build to be the second place list, that Goldengo Dragapult. That is what I'm referring to here as Dragapult being unfavorable. I think that is what most Dragapult variants you're going to play against will look like. And Goldengo can really easily clear all of your walls except for Cornerstone, and then Dragapult has a great time clearing your Cornerstone. So that matchup, very bad. They just have answers to everything, and there's not a whole lot you can do about it, honestly. Then Gardevoir EX. Now, Gardevoir EX is pretty inconsistent right now, so you can sometimes take a prize lead early on with Cornerstone. Cornerstone is going to be your best attacker just because it forces the most resources out of them, and it's the easiest thing for you to set up. You don't have to worry about evolving it. You just put 3 energy on it, and they can't attack it with their Gardevoir, which puts you in a pretty decent spot. But if they do get set up, there's not really a whole lot you can do. It's pretty easy for them to just chain together some Screamtail and Drifloon attacks to wipe out your Cornerstones late game. You need your Munkidoris to take some cheeky prize cards here or there, or maybe even Mind Bend for some knockouts on their single prizers. And you really need them to have a really slow start so you can take a significant prize lead before they get completely set up. That's all I have for you for today, though. If you enjoyed, want to check out any of my other content or my socials, all of that will be in the links tree in the description below. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.